I am Jesse, your friendly neighborhood J-Man. This is the almost internet famous internet show, and today I'm giving you the briefest of brief histories of Star Trek, the original series, and a look at Mezco Toyz 112 Collective Mr. Spock figure. Come right back.
And now, the aggregator of awesome, the curator of cool, my dad, your friendly neighborhood Jman.
On September 8, 1966, NBC aired the first episode of what would eventually become a groundbreaking series, Star Trek. The episode, called The Man Trap, recounted an adventure had by Captain James T. Kirk and his crew aboard the Starfleet vessel, the USS Enterprise, in the 23rd century. The episode saw the crew of the Enterprise being attacked by a salt vampire, a shape-shifting alien that drained the salt from other beings. Of course, the crew of the Enterprise would go on to prevail against the salt-sucking alien and continue on its way in its well-noted 5-year mission. The series had a bumpy ride up to the point of the airing of The Man Trap, though 2.5 years prior, in March of 1964, series creator Gene Roddenberry drew up a short draft for a sci-fi series he called Star Trek. His idea for the show was for a crew comprised of men and women to journey across the unknown parts of our galaxy, exploring strange new worlds in an interstellar starship. Drawing on his experience writing westerns through the 50s and the 60s, Roddenberry characterized Star Trek in the vein of one of the more popular westerns of the time, calling it the wagon train to the stars. Roddenberry met with independent production company Desolate Productions, a production company owned by, interestingly enough, Desi Arnaz and Lucille Ball, and an agreement was struck to create a pilot episode for the series. That episode, called The Cage, was filmed in late 1964. Written by Gene Roddenberry, the episode featured Captain Christopher Pike commanding the USS Enterprise, responding to a distress call from the Talos Star group. Upon arriving at the planet where the distress call originated from, Pike and his landing party found a group of survivors from a scientific expedition that had been missing for 18 years. Amongst them, of course, is the Achilles heel of every Starfleet captain, a wicked, pretty woman, this case named Vina. Of course, Pike is captivated by Vina's charms, and as Pike and the crew of the Enterprise are quick to find out, the whole thing was a ruse. Pike is captured by the native bobblehead Talosians, who dwell beneath the surface of the planet. They want Pike and Vina to get it on, to repopulate the surface world, and being that it was desolate, there would be plenty of getting it on for both of them. Captain Pike wants nothing to do with the diabolical scheme of fornicating with a beautiful woman for the rest of his days. And after a bit more hijinks, the Talosians show they're really not bad folks. They're just drawn that way. They allow Pike and the Enterprise to go along their merry way. No harm, no foul. And instead of nuking the planet from space, which seems to be the answer to many sci-fi problems, the Enterprise just continues on its 5-year mission. The pilot was ultimately rejected by the network, executives calling it too cerebral and too slow. With some behind-the-scenes lobbying by Lucille Ball, NBC executives gave the somewhat unprecedented order for a new pilot to be made. And thus, Where No Man Has Gone Before was put into production. Only Leonard Nimoy, playing the character Mr. Spock, made the transition to the second pilot. With Captain Pike gone, the Enterprise needed a new captain. Television actor William Shatner was signed on to play Captain James T. Kirk. Joining him and Nimoy would be James Doohan and George Takei as Chief Engineer Lieutenant Commander Scott and Lieutenant Sulu, respectively. After viewing the new pilot, the network greenlit the show and ordered 16 additional episodes for the 1966-67 season, airing the first episode, The Man Trap, on September 8, 1966. The cast would expand during the filming of the first season to include DeForest Kelley as Dr. McCoy and Nichelle Nichols as Communications Officer Lieutenant Uhura. Star Trek wouldn't quite make its 5-year mission, though, only lasting a total of 3 seasons and 79 episodes. But don't feel so bad for the show, because it would go on to spawn 5 additional TV series, with a new one currently in production, 13 movies, and of course, what I love, toys. Speaking of which, we'll be right back to talk about Mezco Toyz 112 Collective Mr. Spock figure right after this.
a billion stars, a lonely ship streaks along an endless path. It's the mammoth starship Enterprise. Follow her trackless journey each week on Star Trek. William Shatner stars as Captain James Kirk, Starship Commander, and Leonard Nimoy stars as Science Officer Spock, half Earthling, half Vulcanian. There are hazards that beset the Enterprise and its crew on board ship and on alien planets. Don't miss Star Trek in color.
Earlier this year, Mezco Toyz released images of a new 112 collective figure based on Leonard Nimoy's portrayal of Mr. Spock in Star Trek, the original series. Well, from Mezco's lips to my hands, we've got the 6-inch scale figure right here for you to gawk at. Now, before we start, I gotta lay down a few qualifications first. The figure we're looking at today here isn't the officially released figure. It's actually one that was given out at Mezco Toyz pre-Toy Fair event in early February 2016. Yes, I've been hanging on to this figure for that long, unopened in its box. Yes, I know there's something wrong with me, but I wanted to be a bit, synergistic and time this little show with the figure being officially released. So while there is something totally wrong with me, maybe, just maybe, you'll cut me a little slack in the meantime. With all that being said, we've got to keep in mind there's a few key differences between this one and the final version that's hitting stores as my words hit your ears. Differences not in the figure per se, but things that have to do with the figure. For instance, the packaging. The packaging is different for the official release. The 112 Collective Spock comes in Mezco's fancy-dancy 5-panel display box with acetate cover. What's great about the packaging for this line is how easy the figure and its accessories are to remove and then put right back in the box. The pre-Toy Fair version that we're looking at here came in a slightly less exciting box, but I'm really not complaining. The other difference is the ton of accessories that comes with the official release. Spock comes with all sorts of goodies, including an alternate head, tricorder, phaser, communicator, and several hands in various states of openness. This one only came with a figure stand. Again, I'm really not complaining. Now that all that unpleasantness is out of the way, let's get down to brass tacks. Let me tell you something about this figure. If you're a fan of the show or have a secret shrine of Leonard Nimoy somewhere in your place of residence, this figure has got to be yours. The likeness of Nimoy/Spock is flippin' uncanny. See for yourself. If it doesn't look like Mezco somehow magically removed Nimoy from an episode of Trek using blood magic, then I don't know what does. The body that Mezco developed for this figure and the other figures in the 112 collective line for that matter is impressive. Articulate isn't the word. Don't get me wrong, this figure is as articulate as any Hasbro Marvel Legends figure out there. He's got 28 points of articulation. Everything twists and turns as expected. This guy is even articulated enough to put his hands behind his back. And he has one of my favorite points of articulation, and I know that sounds kind of weird, but I am a big fan of the swivel joint in the feet, which Mr. Spock here sports as well. But there's something else about this figure beyond the articulation. I think it's flexible. The plastic seems more flexible than your average run-of-the-mill action figure. I don't know. Again, it's probably just blood magic. Then there's the costume. Lots of times with these small figures, the real fabric costuming doesn't look right on them. It doesn't fit right, and it often doesn't look like real clothes either. But that's not the case here. The costume fits him nicely, almost tailored even. It's show accurate too. It features the Starfleet emblem on the shirt and the rank stripes on the sleeve. Spock also is wearing Starfleet standard issue pants and patent leather boots. He also comes with a figure stand, which is very convenient, and a posing staff, which is cool and all. I just don't see my Spock doing any sort of crazy high-level stunt work here. My Spock is more of a highly illogical kind of Spock. Mezco's 112 collective figures are definitely on par in quality to Hot Toys 6 scale figures. They actually may be even more impressive due to the amount of detail they cram into the smaller scale, and they're far less expensive than the Hot Toys figures. Mr. Spock here retails for $70 as opposed to Hot Toys 12-inch figures retailing anymore for about $225. I can't help but reiterate, if you're a Trekkie or a Trekker, whichever you go by, you'd be totally remiss missing out on this figure. And that is all the time we have for today's show. I'd like to thank myself for putting all this shit together. Don't forget to check out my website, the-newsbox.com. It's all the news that you can't live without. I am on all your favorite social media. I'm on the Twitter, I'm on the Facebook, and I'm even on the Google+. All you gotta do is search. And finally, we will wrap Plugorama up with this. Subscribe. If you like what you've seen here, tell your friends, tell your neighbors, tell everybody. Tell that stranger down the street. But most importantly, subscribe.